Good morning. I'm here this morning to bring the word of the Lord to us, and I'm really keen that we keep in Christmas for just that little bit longer. So this morning I'm going to read to you from Luke chapter 2, verses 21 to 28. On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus, the name that the angel had given him before he had been conceived. When the time of their purification according to the law of Moses had been completed, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it was written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what it is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord Christ. Moved by the Spirit, he went to the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for a revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel." The child's father and mother marveled at what had been said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, "This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." There was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until 84. She never left the temple, but worshipped day and night, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. When Mary and Joseph had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth, and the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Before we get into the story of the text, let me just give you some context for the circumstances in which Anna and Simeon lived. You may remember from Old Testament stories that after the Jewish people had returned to rebuild Jerusalem, and after Malachi had prophesied about the coming of God as a judge, there were no more words from God. No prophecies, no wonders, no protection from the powers and principalities, just silence. And that silence, 400 years of no signs or wonders, is the backdrop to the birth of Christ. It's hard to conceive the wonder of the Christ child for us, because we hear the story with all the knowledge of what came before and what came after his birth. It's almost impossible for us to isolate the events in the temple that day and understand the context that Simeon and Anna would have had. However, understanding that context of silence helps us to realize the wonder of their witness. Simeon was a man full of the Holy Spirit. He knew and understood the scriptures, and he was simply waiting with hope for the fulfillment of the promises made by God through the ages. The promises made to Abraham when the Lord said, "I will make your name great, and through you all the nations will be blessed." The promise made to Isaac and then Jacob. The promise God gave Moses, then David. The promise God made through Isaiah, and the prophetic prediction of Micah. Promises that the Jewish people would be redeemed by a Messiah, that the Lord would come, bringing comfort and rescue, the consolation of Israel. And so it was in that silence that Simeon still listened to God, and the Spirit was upon him. In faith, he knew that the Spirit's word for him was that he would see the Messiah in his lifetime. And so he waited, folded in the blanket silence of God, this man with such faith that he dedicated his life to waiting in the certainty that the word he'd had was true and just. And now, as an old man, still he had not given up hope. He just waited and worshipped and waited. When Mary and Joseph appeared in the temple that day, Simeon had also gone there, prompted by the Spirit. And somehow, when Simeon saw that child, he knew. Of all the babies who had been presented through all the years he'd been in the temple, it was this one that he took in his arms with praise and thanksgiving, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for the revelation of the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel." And he prophesied to Mary about the child, saying, "This child is destined to cause the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your soul too." Sobering words for Mary to reflect upon. The story goes on to tell us about Anna. And although Anna is named in Luke's account, which few women are, and even given the rare title of prophet, her words are not recorded. And so I have put my words into her mouth as we imagine her in this scene. I heard the words of Simeon, words of wonder and prophecy and warning. My heart leapt at the things that he was saying over that child in his arms. Throughout the years of my widowhood, I have been praying and fasting for our people. Even since Rome took us and subjugated us, so I have given my life and soul to the exaltation of peace and freedom for our people through the fulfillment of the prophecies. Here this day in my dotage, I am blessed to witness the one who would bring our redemption. In those tiny sparkling eyes will be the witness of our injustice. In those tiny hands are God's power to heal and save and restore. Through this innocent babe will come the reparation, the reclamation, and the restitution of humanity. He is the shining reality that transforms our thoughts and our lives in this present darkness. Here is the Christ child. Here is the breaking through of God. His kingdom has come. In these few verses, we are treated to a scene of exquisite faith. Two people who spent a lifetime committed to God, even though there must have been so much doubt among the people who were subjugated to the rules and laws of a politicized religion, and crushed under the weight of yet another superpower's oppression, with no sign of a faithful or present God. I'm touched and humbled by the trusting nature of their waiting. It is a godly waiting. It's expectant, undulled by the years, and enabled clearly by the Holy Spirit. I wonder what examples you have of times of waiting in your life. Many of us will know what it's like to wait for exam results, or having to wait for a job offer. I wonder if some of us know what it's like waiting for a pregnancy test, or waiting to see if the offer on your dream house is accepted, or waiting to see if your kids will turn a corner. We all know what it's like waiting for that Amazon package to be delivered. Or more currently, we really do know what it's like waiting for a COVID test result, or waiting for a call to receive our vaccine, or waiting to hug a beloved family member. There is a lot of waiting in our life. It's difficult when we're waiting to think of other things, to get on with our daily life without distraction. We sometimes defer hope because we're waiting for an outcome. Although one of the things that I've realised as I get older is that a lot of the joy is in the anticipation rather than in the event itself. One of the many things that I've taken from Simeon and Anna's story is that I don't think that they put their faith on hold while they're waiting for the promises of God to be delivered. I think that they were faithful every day in their waiting. They worshipped at the temple every day. Anna prayed and fasted every day. She's said to have arrived at the temple when it opened in the morning and to have stayed there until it closed every day. Even though they saw no evidence of God's promises being fulfilled, they didn't doubt that God was at work in the world. With no clarity about who or what it was that they were expecting, they never lost trust that it would come. At no point did they try to force God's hand or bargain with him. They didn't just press on with their own life's goals. Anna was widowed for 84 years, and that would have been a major blow for her. Life would have been exceedingly hard as a widow in those times. But what we see is a woman dedicated to God's goals, not her own. In waiting for God, we see no evidence that either Simeon or Anna believed that their lives had taken a detour. They don't give the impression that they would have rather been somewhere else or doing something else. In fact, only through their waiting and believing were they able to be present at the temple on the day that Jesus was presented. For Anna and Simeon, their lives were lived whilst they were waiting and worshipping and praying, and those lives were well lived. For very many of us, it feels as though we are trapped in a waiting place at the moment, waiting for the passing of the virus so that we can get on with our lives again. In a conversation with my son just this week, I sensed the level of frustration that he feels about being unable to return to university. This is my degree, he pointed out to me with frustration. I'm going to leave university with a science degree where I have no lab experience. It's a different kind of waiting for the medical staff and teachers and the police, waiting for the pressure to be lifted so that they can rest and recuperate, waiting for a break, probably waiting for a pay increase. One of the things that we have to take from time to time in the waiting is that we must get on with the living. We're never doing nothing while we're waiting. We're thinking, we're learning, we're experiencing. We're planning, we're fulfilling, we're hoping, and we're dreaming. We relate, we love, we travel, we change, we grow. All of these things were true for Simeon and Anna, and they continue to be true for every one of us. The little boy that lives next door to me is 5. And a couple of weeks before Christmas, he dictated a Christmas card to me. And in it, his mum wrote his words. He said, "I'm trying to be patient about Christmas, but it's so far away that it feels like it's halfway round the world." And yet in that impatience, he continued to be a son and a new brother and a schoolboy. He baked and he crafted and he rang my doorbell about 50,000 times. And we were all very relieved when Christmas finally came. Waiting is not stopping. Godly waiting, at least, is hoping, praying, and faithfully anticipating that God has a plan, that God is assuredly carrying out his promises, and that God will bring to fruition what he has told us he will do. Like Simeon and Anna, waiting requires us to continue to have faith that God is present when silent, that God keeps his promises, including the promise that he never leaves us or forsakes us, that he has a plan for us, and that it's a plan to prosper us and not to harm us, a plan to give us hope for the future. It requires us to know that God is powerful and that he is loving. If God is powerful, then he has control. He's capable of fulfilling his promises. If God is loving, then we can trust that he intends to bring each of us into full relationship with him. And when we remember those things, we're not at the mercy of our circumstances. We can wait in the knowledge that God's care and purpose is in all that God has for us. Simeon and Anna didn't have the advantage of seeing God work through Jesus in his life and death and resurrection in the way that we do. They had to trust in the powerful, loving God who had been silent and unseen for 400 years, even in the face of abject suffering of his people. But we have that advantage. We have the knowledge of the ministry of Jesus and all the theology that's been built upon his actions and words. No matter what we face in our life at the moment, and I know that so many of us have big and difficult challenges that we face at this time, COVID or not, our waiting and wondering can be more bearable if we look to these two old and faithful characters. It's strange that they are so often overlooked in the retelling of the Jesus story. They offer such rich encouragement. They bowed before God every day of their lives, fully engaged in their faith, believing in the presence of God, knowing the power of God, and trusting in the love of God. As I reflect upon the words that we're about to sing together, I wonder, when Simeon took the Christ child in his arms and acknowledged his understanding that in that babe was the fulfillment of God's promises, did he feel that he was standing on holy ground? Did he feel the presence of the Holy One? As Anna spoke to everyone about the child that she had witnessed, did she tell them about the glory of the Lord shining from that child? Did she say to them, "I have seen the radiant King of light"? Can we look upon that babe born in a stable to humble parents and be struck by the power of the Lord in tiny, podgy hands and feet? As we wait for solutions and resolutions to the crazy circumstances of our current lives, are we open to receiving his grace? Even if it feels that God is very quiet at the moment, can we remember his power, his love, and his promises, and trust that he is present with us all the time?